All right. Well, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and welcome to our panel discussion on AI, near-term applications and implications. I'm Michael Gammerl, a fellow of the Business Excellence Institute, and your chair for this discussion. The Business Excellence Institute, or BEX for short, is the only global membership body for business excellence professionals, headquartered in Dublin, with members in 38 countries on 6 continents. It is the leading authority on excellence and the go-to organization for those wanting to excel. And membership, for those of you who are not members, provides access to expertise, professional networks, tools, and solutions, and is available to both individuals and organizations. For our discussion today, we have Dr. Anastasia Lauterbach, we have David Cullen, and we have Nele Leosk, and each providing their perspectives and insights, and each will briefly introduce themselves in just a moment. But first, a little housekeeping. As was noted when you joined, the session is being recorded and will be available later for sharing. Those of you who are participants are muted, but we endeavor to get to your questions, so please use the chat to provide comments and questions, which we will get to toward the end of our time together. Lastly, a quick plug for our upcoming panel discussion on ethics in professional services, which will be in September, hosted by BEX fellow Dwight Mahalich in Canada. So be on the lookout for more information on that. We definitely want to see you there. I'll go ahead and kick in with a brief introduction and a couple use cases that can serve as both examples of near-term applications of AI and the challenges that go with them. And each of our panelists will do the same in just a little bit. So again, my name is Michael, and I have 30 years of experience in education, focused in areas around college and career readiness, assessments. And I've also been involved in AI EdTech development for the past 3 years, and this is for use in K-12 schools, continuing education, professional development. And we hear a lot about the potential for students to cheat using perhaps ChatGPT. But another use case would be for teachers. And they could use similar AI technology to help them create lesson plans or test questions. And this doesn't require any special technical integration, and it can immediately help a teacher spend more time teaching rather than doing administrative work around lesson planning or test item creation. And yes, there are plenty of sophisticated systems that wrap in other features, but this is a simple way that any instructor can utilize widely available AI and LLM, large language model technology. But this same concept can be applied to the creation of, for example, marketing copy or sales collateral for businesses. So teams can focus more on selling, right, the core function, rather than administrative or operational functions. And those are just a couple of examples from my experience. And I will turn to each of my colleagues to briefly introduce themselves and provide a couple of use cases based on their experience and work in their field. So Nele, why don't we start with you?
Hello, everybody, and I hope you can hear me well. So I have had the pleasure to also cooperate with BEX in different organizational assessments, and I'm really glad that in my new role or not that new role anymore, for the past 2.5 years, I have served the ambassador for digital affairs for Estonian government. So I'm a diplomat serving in the Estonian foreign service. And oftentimes people ask me, okay, what do tech ambassadors do? And there are a lot of myths around because it is a growing, and I would say perhaps even a trendy topic. And I have to say that I actually don't deal with AI per se, but I do deal AI when it comes to some global governance and norms. But I have dealt with AI in my previous capacity advising different governments on more on reforms and digitalization. And I am quite well, of course, aware what is happening in Estonia, that as I also represent Estonia in different question in terms of how Estonia positions itself globally, but also what we do in our small but very innovative country. So we had our first AI strategy adopted, I would say, around 6 or 7 years ago, when we had also our first action plan, and perhaps all of those who are expecting to see some really groundbreaking big project that Estonia has implemented that will entirely change how we have function. I would say that this has actually not happened yet. So Estonia, of course, has made a lot of, I would say, steps in the application of AI, but often the ones that are mostly used are actually small things that make the life of public officials easy and simpler. And I think until now, the most used AI application, and all Estonians' public developments are open source. So also all our AI algorithms and applications can be reached online and reused. We have a open source, but also AI repository if anybody is interested to check it out. But one of them is actually just a tool to recognize private data. All, let's say, court decisions in Estonia need to be public. However, they cannot contain private information when made public. So, for example, one of these solutions that Estonian different government organizations use is just to detect automatically private data before it was done automatically, or not automatically, but by really physically by a person. Of course, but now we do have, I would say, three major projects going on. One is actually related to teaching AI Estonian. So we have a big initiative on speech recognition, where different background people, even though Estonia does not have so many different dialects that you wouldn't recognize one from the other, but still there is a big language learning program going on to teach AI. And this is also actually currently I would say an impediment for Estonian government, that, for example, Siri does not have Estonian language support, as do many other smaller languages. And we have to do that job ourselves to keep our language and culture. The second big project, and I know that everybody who hears chatbot is probably getting frustrated, but we do have a big all governmental government chatbot initiative going on that will be launched soon, and it's also integrated with service delivery. Uh, there are some issues, of course, around that we don't use speech or facial recognition in Estonia. We have digital identity that is based on public infrastructure, but the aim is to help people if they have a question, not knowing what function governments have or which authority is responsible for a certain area, for certain service, let's say a social service or a taxation or something else, so that people can have it from all one place. So the information is gathered across the government, and in case it's not found from public information, it will direct automatically to the relevant office, either back office or then a phone person. And the third one, which is that has been, I wouldn't say controversial, but have been some debates about similar initiatives globally, whether this now starts to violate our privacy too much or not. But we have still implemented it. Is to it's around social service, and actually it was launched during COVID when a lot of people lost their jobs. And this project combines data about the job market and about a person who has lost a job to recommend certain steps to be taken in his new work career, but it is also connected to the social services. So it automatically, based on the data that the government has about the person, also I would say directs to the social benefits that the person can get from the government. So I would say these are the four things from currently from Estonian government. Of course, when it comes to a lot of personalization of health and, for example, healthcare services, we have a challenge in Estonia because some of our local municipalities are so small. So there is simply not enough information for predictive use of AIs. There is not enough data, but of course, there are some assistance in court decisions and so forth. But I'm sure that people more knowledgeable on AI will touch upon this today. So thank you.
Excellent. Thank you, Nele. Why don't we hand off to David?
Thanks, Michael. I'm afraid my uses aren't as great as those that Nelly has just outlined. Although, if you're available to come to Ireland, I think we would welcome some of those systems here. They sound like very good initiatives. I'm a lawyer by trade, 30 years counting, practicing technology law. Out of Ireland, we have offices in a bunch of different countries, UK, US, and technologies is all I've done. So I've seen quite a few things and changes over the years. One of the challenges is the development and the pace of development in this. I envy my real estate sort of colleagues sometimes who've been doing the same thing the same way for hundreds of years and very reluctant to change, but I wouldn't have it any other way, to be honest with you. There's a few things that we use technology for. I'll mention one in the legal sphere that I think might be an interest to the audience here, and that's sort of searching through unstructured data to try and find that needle in the haystack. So every organization has a huge amount of unstructured data, and we have quite a few legal tasks that involve trying to find key information, litigation information, personal data requests come in where people are looking for their data, and we help clients with those. There's a lot of different things these days where businesses like ours and our clients are trying to find that needle in a haystack. So one of the things that we have been sort of doing ourselves and working with others is in using the tools that are available. We don't all have 100 million knocking around in our pocket to develop our own model. I think that was somebody asked Sam Altman how much it cost to create GPT-4 for OpenAI, and somebody asked him, was it 100 million? And he said it was more than that. So not too many businesses are in that kind of sphere where they're able to spend that amount of money. But there's a lot of very good technology there. And we have used that to systems that have been deployed for particular purposes to train them to look for data. So, for example, you might have a system that is used in discovery, just for you can read in all the data that a business has, all the emails related to a particular topic or a transaction, whatever it is that you happen to do. And then you start to filter it down to look for the information that you're looking for. So one easy, I won't give away all our secrets, but one of the things in terms of filtering things is looking for patterns, which computers are brilliant at once you start training them. So we all reply to emails these days. Has anybody ever deleted the stuff below the email that they get? They don't. So they just reply with everything below it and keep going. Keep building up that. Memory's cheap and storage is cheap, so we keep doing that. So instead of having to search for sort of the number of items that are in the database, you can usually cut it by a factor of 10, 20, simply by deduplicating records. And believe me, when you're dealing with the volumes of database that we have these days, all of those kind of things, trying to get from hundreds of thousands of pieces of information to the relevant pieces that you're after, whatever it happens to be, like I said, litigation, transaction, data protection requests, those kind of strategies are incredibly important these days. So I think that's one I think a lot of businesses, and certainly ours, uses a lot. Computers recognizing these patterns and helping to train them. We'd be completely lost dealing with the amount of information we have these days if we didn't have that. The other two related ones that I mentioned that we see used are on the HR side of things. We're seeing a number of people deploy different types of AI systems in terms of the recruitment process. So instead of having to go through all of the initial round of interviews, they're using systems to filter through the CVs, resumes of the various people, and trying to identify particular characteristics, skill sets, things that they're looking for in terms of hiring, so as to try and relieve some of the pain for an organization in terms of the initial assessments, anyway, of candidates. Now, we've seen some challenges with some of those kind of systems. We'll probably come back to it later in the talk, but one of the things that you obviously have to be very careful of, and always advising clients on these kind of issues, are you have to have very good quality data, obviously, going into those systems in the first place before you use them. If there's inherent bias in there, because we've seen public examples of companies, I won't name them, but they're there if anybody wants to go looking, of companies that have reportedly used their previous sort of CVs in terms of people that they've gone through and hired to figure out which people that they're going to put into the next hiring phase for their organization. And they found that they were getting far less women than they wanted. And the simple reason was that there had been discrimination in the past in terms of the hiring practice of the organization. And they kept trying to fix the model. They kept telling it, if it saw woman or any gender term, that it was to neutralize that. But it was so embedded within the data that it, even just trying to neutralize those terms didn't actually work for them. So really useful tools, but they also take I'd sort of say there's a large pinch of caution with those as well. But they're certainly very good in terms of trying to save some time, money, and expense. The other thing is on boards. Corporate governance, I think, will be something that's probably close to the hearts of some people here, I know, on the call. And one of the things that I thought was interesting that I saw recently was that they're using AI systems to assist with filling vacancies on a board. So sometimes there can be challenges on a board in terms of identifying the skill set. The existing board might be looking at developing the ideal sort of skill sets that they want for a vacancy on the board, an extra seat or replacing someone. And there can be some internal conflicts, shall we say, in terms of trying to do that. Some people may be trying to weight the board one way or another. There can be different factions and so on. And it can be quite challenging and time consuming for a board to develop all the skill sets, look at all the skill sets they have, look at all the skill sets they want, and trying to match ideally where they feel they should be in the market and what it is exactly that they're looking for in a candidate to fill that position. And AI can be used in these kind of situations to take it away from the existing board and the potential perceived bias, even if it's not there, and get the AI system to actually generate the ideal skill set that is needed for that board, for that vacancy. So that's something I thought was quite interesting and quite a smart use of AI to avoid some complications.
Nice. Thank you, David. All right, we have Anastasia, and earlier we were just talking about what it takes to build an AI-capable company. And I know you've got lots of other examples as well. So we'll hand off to Anastasia.
Anastasia, I'm based in Austria, and I'm quite often in Switzerland. I do 3 things in life with a disclaimer, which I will bring later on. The first thing is I teach AI and cybersecurity. I'm very much focused on the business development side of AI and practicalities to actually execute on models and on theories. I am very much involved in the development of the risk management and quantification of cybersecurity exposure. which has a component of AI in it. I serve on corporate boards, and last but not least, I mentor top executives for three things. One is C-level readiness, or maybe a succession, then crisis in all kinds of varieties, and last but not least, transformation. Obviously, my clients mostly get to me when we talk about digital transformation. The disclaimer is that last week I embarked on a new journey, which I will reveal on December 31st. It will be around a very bold ambition to bring the knowledge of AI into 1 million households in a very foreseeable future. So I won't say more, but it brings me to limiting my capacities to teach and actually to mentor. So I will be working only with 6 individuals per year, and that's it. I have 2 interesting examples for you, real use cases. The first is from 2011, and the learning is that AI is nothing new. On March 11, 2011, the world learned about a huge disaster due to an earthquake and a tsunami in the Pacific. The nuclear power plant in Japan got damaged, and 20,000 people died on this day. They perished in sea. What is not quite known is that Japan stopped reporting data on this day. Obviously, in global connected economies, one country, which is a really crucial country in the supply chain, not reporting data, it brings a lot of questions. And the world was still in recovery after the financial crisis. I was on the board of Dun & Bradstreet, which is one of the largest data companies in the world. And Dun & Bradstreet responded to this disaster in simulating the whole data set of the Japanese economy. It was done with the help of 6 people, data scientists, so not data engineers or statisticians, but really data scientists. And it took this team 6 weeks to actually model the whole Japan. The error rate after Japan restarted reporting the data was below 1%, which is actually fantastic. So there was a very concrete question in the room, which company is still there and working, and which company is not there any longer because it perished or stopped. And around the very concrete questions, there were a number of parameters. Obviously, Dun & Bradstreet has never been in a geographical data business. But it had a lot of knowledge in the so-called remote computational interface around data identities and resolutions of data and enterprise identity. So the team of 6 people had expertise in this, and on top of that, those people had very different backgrounds in their university formation. So one person, for example, was a physicist. By the way, I absolutely adore working with people with physics in their background when it comes to AI. And he knew how to read radiation. So there was a crowdsourced data bank with radiation data in it. And he could actually see whether there were some errors in this data bank because he understood how to apply data on humidity and geological data to really ask the question and give a response with a formidable hypothesis whether the radiation level was so high that it actually prevented the businesses from normal functioning. Dun & Bradstreet had a partner, which was an organization providing satellite images. In those satellite images, one could see lights during the night, and the initial hypothesis was that probably it was an indicator that the business was still in place. But that was a wrong hypothesis, because actually it was just an indicator that there were people sleeping in some buildings. But for example, some cars in a parking space next to the building was a wonderful indicator that the business was going on. I will spare you all kind of different details, but this exercise, which the result of was released free of charge to the world, generated wonderful IP for Dun & Bradstreet. And this exercise actually taught the world that the domain knowledge was absolutely crucial in executing an AI theory. And then obviously a knowledge from different disciplines was very helpful to solve a very concrete problem and to give a very concrete response to a very concrete question on what to do to actually build again and simulate this data set of the Japanese economy. My second example is quite recent. We had, I think 1.5 years ago, a premiere in Bonn, and that was a musical premiere where the 10th Symphony of Beethoven was played first by the Beethoven Orchestra of Bonn, and then there was a second premiere in the Philharmonie in Hamburg. Obviously, Beethoven wrote only 9 symphonies. He started the 10th, but he has never finished. And with the help of generative AI, we actually wrote the 10th symphony. It was done with building a nice data set of historical data, so the whole work of Beethoven went into it, and we complemented this volume of work with scores of the composers who were peers of Beethoven and lived in the same time. Obviously, there was a real composer who assisted the whole project, and obviously AI, generative AI, produced a bunch of synthetical data, which you can enjoy today in music. Professional musicians can't differentiate where the melody of Beethoven stops and where AI takes over. Obviously, today, generative AI produced a lot of music. And the results are quite astonishing. In this context, we see a very positive case of the use of generative AI. Obviously, my focus very much is on cybersecurity, and this is where we see a lot of negative use cases, where AI technologies is in hands of criminals and they exercise increased attacks on companies and individuals to steal data, to execute ransomware attacks and just stop the company from functioning. I believe that AI and cyber goes hand to hand, and this is due to the fact that the major valuation driver in businesses today is all about digital. Digital assets today make approximately 90% in valuation of businesses. And when we think back in 2011, for example, so my first AI example, this number was much lower. It was in between of 12 to 15%. So for this reason, huge attention to that. In terms of what does it take to really think AI in a traditional business, so there's no science fiction in that. AI is actually math from the 40s and 50s. And computational power, obviously, and the capability to assemble and touch a huge volume of data makes this miracle of AI happen. Still, the costs of computation and cloud are on the rise. Today, an AI company would spend 25% of the revenues on cloud costs. There is no comparison or direct comparison in scalability of AI companies comparing to software as a service companies. So there's no this extravagant linearity, because obviously the data domains differ. And when you train models, there are a lot of interferences you need to pay attention to. you need to be very sophisticated in maths and actually be very sophisticated in how you touch and clean data. So this is obviously what drives the cost of implementing AI. Still, I believe that going the AI path is a must because it just brings businesses and economies competitive advantages. It's my privilege today to be on a webinar with Nelly, who is from Estonia. Estonia is a country which understands decentralized data markets like no other country knows. And I was a huge supporter of the establishment of the Ocean Protocol, which powers decentralized data on blockchain. Singapore is another economy which makes use of this movement. I believe that having proprietary, clean, sophisticated organization and governance of data is a huge competitive advantage. And this is where I believe companies need to move into and think about. At the same time, they should really understand what is behind technologies like, for example, ChatGPT, which is not generally AI, which is not something which will kill us all, which makes tons of mistakes due to their architecture and the limitations of deep learning as we know it today. So I'll just shut up and pass to my fellow webcasters.
Yes, no, that's great, Anastasia. Thank you so much. And obviously, in all of these different cases, we're hearing about data. And David, I wouldn't mind just sort of having you start us off, given your legal background, on these implications around how data is used. Part of it is the IP protection around what exists, the data that's being pulled, but then part of it is around this concept of generating new things. Like I can't wait to hear Beethoven's 10th Symphony, and then who owns that? So David, I'd love for you to kick off with your thoughts on that.
Well, at least Beethoven's not around to sue anybody if he's not happy with the outcome. I'm sure it sounds fantastic. There's a lot of exciting challenges, I have to say, as a lawyer, in terms of looking at the issues that relate to. There's not a sample of it there. In relation to the we should get you to play some at the end. The ChatGPT. Okay, so the uses that companies are making. Very interesting examples. Michael gave some really good examples in terms of the ed tech and generating a teaching program and things like that. And legally, the issues that there would be there in terms of IP ownership maybe wouldn't be as great. For businesses, if you're generating marketing collateral, what you'll need to think about is whether you want to actually have IP ownership of the output. So one of the challenges that there is at the moment in relation to the intellectual property situation is that a lot of the intellectual property laws are designed and were written at a time that didn't contemplate anything like this for the most part, and therefore require humans to be the owner, the author, behind the intellectual property. So copyright works need an author, and most of the US Copyright Office has had a look at this and decided that there needs to be a human author, or if there's joint work between a human and an AI, that there has to be significant contribution from a human involved. You can't just do the prompt and come up with your output and then go with that. You can, good luck, but in terms of intellectual property ownership, there's probably no owner of that. If you invent something, if there's something invented, there's a guy called Stephen Fowler who's been fighting his case in various patent offices, helpfully sort of leading the way in terms of this. And the same issue he's come up against again and again. So he has a very clever beverage container that adapts its shape, and an emergency light beacon, I think, as well. He has an AI system called Davis, which has come up with these completely independently. So the only inventor in those cases is the AI. There wasn't human intervention, at least in the claims. It was just the AI as the inventor. Again, the offices have said it's not possible for a machine to be the inventor in respect of these. So if you're a business, then you have to think about whether you want to, are you okay with what you create being put out there and other people being able to use it? If you are, that's great. That's fantastic. It's a good tool. But if you want to create something which you want your company to be able to protect, own, stop others from using, then these systems I'd be very careful, because it seems quite likely, without significant human intervention, that there probably won't be that IP ownership that a lot of businesses would like to have. So it depends on the use. The other side of the IP, if I could just briefly add, would be you need to be careful about the things that are going into it. So what I'm always telling clients is, you need to think about this being sort of a person in the pub or the bus or somewhere, some third-party coffee shop or something like that. You don't put confidential, maybe it seems obvious, but I've seen people put all sorts of things into ChatGPT, and they have no idea where it's going or how it's being used or what else it's going to appear in. But you should not put proprietary information into the system, because you cannot maintain that protection and confidentiality in respect of it. So there's different strategies that people can use, we can help with, but you probably want to have policies in your business about when it is good to use this great tool, support tool, and when not to.
Yeah, you bring up a couple good points around how it depends on the use and then having a strategy. And Nele, I'd like to go back to you, because you talked about Estonia some 6-7 years ago creating an AI strategy, and you also said, look, there is no big grand project, yet there are these small things that are being done to help people within the government. Nele, can you speak a little bit about these baby steps that you see happening to make AI useful in your cases?
Yeah, I think this steps that we have taken before this big focus on AI have actually contributed to this, because Estonia around 30 years ago already realized the potential of digital technologies in a way to make our country bigger than it physically is. So I think that this has all led to this willingness among the public sector, but also the public and private sector, to embrace what these new technologies offer. But I would like to actually point out that, of course, there is quite a bit of talk of Estonia being the digital country and the digital leader and so forth and so forth. But actually, it has never been an aim of our country, and I hope it will never become an aim. So it's not about fancy gadgets or I don't know, virtual reality in social services or social housing that we have seen in many countries that we have worked. You will not see that in Estonia. I think it is more of the ability to change, and the ability to change according to what these technologies can offer. So ultimately, it's still supporting a certain field to make it more efficient or more open or so forth. And actually, when we had our 4-year sort of a period finalized, and we had a survey among our public sector to find out what have been the main successes or barriers or that they think. And actually, the biggest barrier was not technological skills, or let's say skills related to finding and analyzing data as we thought it would be, but it was actually the fear of doing something wrong. And I am really glad that today we have actually focused more on the opportunities, even though my current job, as also Anastasia a little bit introduced, I am mainly in my everyday life actually dealing with all the potential risks that can come with AI, and we have seen how it also supports the information war currently happening in relation to the war in Ukraine. So it has huge implications to our democracy and security, and we are finding ways how to deal with these technological challenges globally. Of course, Europe has taken an approach towards regulation and has been even referred to as a Silicon Valley of regulation. Of course, the question is whether this is enough, and probably it is not enough. But our sort of fear about focusing or on the risks is that it actually will become a risk in itself. That we will ultimately uh, stop or push our own people back in embracing these technological innovations. And I think this outcome of or this finding of our survey, that they are afraid because there are so many regulations that they might do something wrong, so they would rather not even do, is actually a good example of it, how it can fire back and may actually take Europe even further back in this global technological landscape than it is now. So I do hope that our people will not be afraid of experimenting, um, uh, regardless of all the bad things.
Yeah, well, you bring up two things, so we definitely need to get Anastasia's input, because you mentioned risk, and then you also mentioned the EU AI Act. So Anastasia, I know you have a lot of insights there.
I mean, I will be very blank and probably I will shock in your audience. I'm not. I don't applaud this piece of regulation. I think this regulation gives all the cards into the baskets of big tech, which will become even bigger and stronger. And it destroys even the option for small companies and for startups to build things, to be innovative and to execute. And this is actually why there was a huge movement around lobbying for this act coming from the side of companies like Alphabet or Microsoft. There were more lobbyists from those companies in Brussels than from pharmaceutical industry. I was thinking very, very hard about what is the best way, because clearly AI has risks. So one of the risks David was talking about, biases, and this is something really practical. How do we debias models? Can we debias historical data sets? For example, many women die from heart conditions because the therapies which they consume were built on a cohort of male patients. So there's a gender gap in medicine, which has health consequences for general public. Is it a path maybe to complement a historical data set with male patients with some synthetical data coming from women? I don't have an answer, but it might be a hypothesis to test. Just as an example, being conscious that we have those biases is tremendously important. And of course, we need to be conscious that implementing human in a loop for AI applications increases costs. Probably companies like Meta can employ thousands and thousands of people to actually look into what is going on and moderate the discussion. And you can always intervene today into a model. But a small company, a small startup can't execute on this with the same, let's say, success and at the same period in time as one large matter. I'll give you one example. There is one company in New York which is doing chatbots for organizing meetings. For example, if David and I are meeting in New York and we would like to meet in a Starbucks, obviously there are hundreds of Starbucks in New York and around, so we need really to know where to go. And Amy, which is this assistant, will really write in a very polite way that we will not take it for a human being to David assistant and really manage to bring us together. So the company around Amy has 160 employees. 90 of those are cleaning data. This is all they're doing. And this is just a very small example. And now imagine you are a company of 3 to 5 and you would like to launch something. What is happening around regulations right now that you need to ask for permission more or less even prior releasing a product. So who has this amount of scrutiny and who has this amount of capabilities to just go and ask for permission, and who the hell is deciding if those people don't truly understand what they need to decide on? So my answer is probably the most unpleasant one to attack this problem. And this is really to drastically increase technology literacy around the globe. And start with children, start in kindergartens and in schools, and really educate people about AI, educate people about social media, AI applications, about what does it mean to have a digital asset? What does it mean to release data to TikTok? What might happen? And people are very much afraid of what they don't understand or what they believe is difficult. So obviously there are thousands of AI definitions out there. So I quite often use a very practical one, that AI is an application of mathematics and computer code to teach a machine to make hypotheses, synthesize and generate knowledge in the way which is common to us humans. For example, a machine can see, a human has eyes, can see. But look, this is something which is not unique to a human substrate, to a human being. Actually, I learned last week that there was an experiment in 2015 to teach pigeons, the birds, to distinguish between anomalies in breast cancer X-rays. And they did it much more successfully than the trained radiologists. I don't think that the pigeons understood what they were doing, but they were capable to see what a human eye could not. So look, I think that this regulation will bring Europe and European competitiveness into the Stone Age. I'm very pessimistic about European prospects in AI. I think that this ship is sailed. The island of hope has always been the UK, but even there it's difficult. Look, for example, there is a proclamation that there will be an investment of 900 million British pounds into supercomputer. And when you look into the details, and the number is, by the way, quite great, but if you look into the details, then you will see that the project will be released around 2031. By 2031, China has completely invested 150 billion US dollars. Even if you take the failure rate of 40%, 60% will still kind of, feed the beast. And United States, together with Canada, will march and actually execute on how to integrate AI into every single sector of economy and into every single function of an enterprise. So I am not a huge proponent of what Europe is doing. And I think that the strategy which is built around fear and lack of knowledge ultimately backfires. This is my personal opinion. I am independent. I don't work for the government or for big tech or for startups. And I can just raise the flag in what I see is going really wrong.
Yeah. Well, and Nele talked to that very point about how the fear of doing something wrong is stopping people. They're not even getting involved in the challenges that come from that. We do have, and of course, this can go in so many different directions. But Pierre has given us a question that can help to direct this conversation. And while we answer Pierre's question, Anastasia, I would ask you to kindly take a look at Barry's question specific to your thoughts on the AI Act. So while you're looking at that, Nele and David, we can tackle Pierre's questions, which has to do very practically with how do you get started? Do you just train people? And Anastasia even talked about technological literacy and starting with children, and that's great. But I've got a company right now. What do I need to do to kind of help get things started? And does it start with something like training? I know my own personal use of ChatGPT. I had to learn how to ask it the right question to get back what I wanted. And that was a learning curve unto itself. So, David, do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, well, I mean, we help sort of businesses in terms of writing policies for using these. So I guess there's a few things that I could throw out in relation to that. I mean, the first thing is obviously to understand that these are machines, right? So it's the GIGO principle: garbage in, garbage out. Hasn't changed since computers were invented. It's the same. You know, they're not emotion. There's no motion. There's no duty. There's no responsibility. So they can be incredibly brilliant and incredibly dumb all at the same time. And I think we've all seen GPT answers that have been quite incredible in terms of the stuff they come up with. But can I just touch on the regulation? I think you know you do need regulation. The AI Act mightn't be. It's certainly not perfect. It won't be perfect, and anything negotiated by a whole bunch of people is never going to be perfect because people pull in different directions and have various different interests between the member states. Never mind once the lobbying gets going. But you do need to regulate these things because I see too many issues around the world in terms of how. Unfortunately, the fear factor gets created by misuses of technology. I'm all for positive uses, but without the regulation, unfortunately, I think the misuses can take over and create that fear and environment that causes problems for good people and good companies doing things. You know, we've had people. The owner of Madison Square Garden had an issue, and I'm not picking this because it was a lawyer that he singled out at the end of the day. But this woman was going to an event there with her child and was stopped from entering because the facial recognition at the entry barrier recognized that from information that she was a lawyer in a law firm that was suing him. She wasn't part of the legal team now that was suing him. She was just in the law firm that was suing him. As I got all that information from the, searching websites and so on, you can see the partners, the profiles are there, hoovered up that information and used it to stop her attending an event at MSG with her child. That you see that in other countries, with less democratic principles where things get out of control. So I think you do have to try and put some parameters on all this.
Wow, that is that's a crazy example. I'd like to hand off to Nele to see if you have a few thoughts specific to that question, and then we can hand back off to Anastasia. Did we lose you? Oh, there you are.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. I lost you, so maybe if I repeat, I apologize. But I agree that we need a certain regulation. And I think we got our lesson, or the globe got the lesson, when we neglected the regulation of the social media platforms. But and we have this, I would say, good practice also from Estonia, where we regulated very early on privacy issues online and so forth, identity issues online, and but I would like to say that this is actually not enough, and the regulation can also not become regulation for regulating sake, which we see quite a bit happening in many countries. That I think we forget that we need to regulate to enable something, not to forbid something. And this big mindset difference is actually quite crucial here. But what I am slightly worried is actually the current developments around global AI governance and global AI regulation. And not only AI, but also several other aspects, for example, human rights online, disinformation, and so forth. And there is a process that was initiated by the UN Secretary General called Global Digital Compact, that originally was supposed to really, I would say, harmonize more the UN different activities around digitalization, because there is a lot of duplication, parallel activities, and maybe come up with some global non-binding principles in many areas in digitalization. Is it data governance, data sharing, or AI? But we see that there is quite a bit of push for some global establishment. Is it going to be now the UN or something else? And this may ultimately also not work in our favor, especially as we have seen also in the EU AI Act negotiations, how complicated it can be. First, because we may have also different standpoints as a rather homogeneous group of countries, but also because we do not necessarily know how and what to regulate, and it gets really complex with topics such as data, for example, when we talk about it globally.
Yeah.
So
I think
let's
that's a
see.
good segue. I think that's a good segue for you, Anastasia, because Barry's questions speak specifically about a piece of regulation that's designed to look at more of a global set of policies.
We need to differentiate where are we discussing and what we are discussing. So if, for example, we attack issues like use of facial recognition for a criminal act, they are laws which are wonderful and applicable. A crime is a crime is a crime. If someone who's a terrorist asks ChatGPT how to create a cholera virus in you, and let's say he's successful and then unleash this cholera on a population, it's a crime, but it has nothing to do with AI. It would have been a crime without AI. AI is a tool. And we need to ask ourselves a question: in what kind of a society do we want to live? Obviously, surveillance is something which is widespread in Russia, who is actually becoming, in my eyes, a fascistic state. Surveillance is all around in China. And we might ask ourselves, do we want to implement this level of surveillance to monitor? And that what would we like to monitor? What does it mean to have free speech in a country? And this is a philosophical discussion much, let's say, beyond AI. We should not cluster everything wrong with our understanding of our society into a discussion about AI. But let me turn back to AI. AI is a force of competitiveness. Prior, Russia viciously attacked Ukraine. When I looked into top 10 most valuable companies around the globe, all 10 were AI-centric businesses, every single one of those. And I was studying properties of AI-centric businesses for my book, The AI Imperative, a practical roadmap for businesses. So the book got published end of 2017, and still most of the book is relevant. I discovered that every single AI-centric business, be it a Tencent or a Meta or Amazon, had 5 basic properties. The first property was that in all of those businesses, there were university professors employed as chief scientists or chief AI officers or whatever the title, and they could really back and forth in between of the company at the university, bringing students with them, supplying the pipeline of talent. So the talent component is really crucial. If you look into Germany or Austria, a professor makes 45 euro an hour, which is the same rate as a cleaning lady. Do I need to follow up on this? The second thing is about data. Obviously, companies which were pioneering AI technologies, they have an insane amount of data which is organized in a certain way. Those companies learned how to build data center technologies. By the way, we need to really watch the space in terms of ESG, as one Alphabet pollutes environment more than all airlines put together, and Alphabet runs only on renewables. So it's something really to watch. And the third thing is actually all those businesses are engaging across the full stack of tech in AI, including building their own semiconductors. We can today sit and lament how ChatGPT will kill us all, but frankly, we are out of semiconductors. Where should we get semiconductors for basic things? So building chipsets and designing chipsets is something which is tremendously important. Countries try to address this through regulation, but believe me, it's not a piece of cake to build a facility for semiconductor manufacturing. And of course, generating IP around semiconductors is tremendously important.
Yeah, I'm going to jump in.
Yeah. Then the last two, just I'll be done really. So this between of R&D and product is very tight. And last but not least, the deal flow. Europe is very poor in venture capital comparing to the United States. And as long as there is no fresh flow of capital, how should those little SMEs do sandboxing or whatsoever is the fantasy of the bureaucrats in Brussels? These practicalities of day-to-day of a life in a startup. They lack money for basic travel expense. So I just think in terms of Nele, regulate in favor and not just in order to restrict and to forbid.
Sure. No, very good. I want to thank everyone for attending. I certainly want to thank our panelists for their insights. We don't have time for the question that was put in by Giannis, but it is a nice teaser because he's talking about ethics. And I have to mention that there's going to be another session on ethics in professional services, again, hosted by Beck's fellow Dwight Mahalich. So be on the lookout for that. But again, wanted to thank everyone for attending. This is just scratching the surface, and maybe what we can do is set up other sessions that dig a little bit deeper into some of the specific points that were brought up here. Again, thank you very much for attending, and we'll look forward to seeing you at our next session.